Hello, I'm Tina Greco, and I'm the transition coordinator for vocational rehabilitation, or VR New Hampshire, formerly New Hampshire Vocational Rehabilitation. So today I'm going to be sharing with you some information regarding our services that are called pre-employment transition services that are specific to students and young people with disabilities. And I'm going to be talking with you a little bit about what they are and how they can be utilized to help a student or a young person in their transition process or in post-secondary, as well as they can help to make the connection to both vocational rehabilitation services as well as special education services. So as just a really general overview, the vocational rehabilitation program is for both students and adults. And so in essence, our charge is to assist people with disabilities to either become employed or to stay employed. And so basically this means that if you have a disability and you need help with either becoming or staying employed, we are here to assist you with that. As I've said, we can help you to find a job. We can help you to prepare for a career. We can help you to stay in the job that you're in. And then certainly even if you were looking to advance within the job that you're in, we can help you to do that as well. So now going into the crux of the presentation today. So to give some background for folks, PreETS, or pre-employment transition services, came onto the scene for the VR program back in 2014. And so basically what this did was it expanded the menu of services that a vocational rehabilitation agency would provide to students and young people with disabilities. And so basically for New Hampshire, that age range for transition is between the ages of 14 to 21. And that what these PreETS services do is they're available to two different sets of students. And I'll explain that difference in a little bit. But the first set of student is somebody who is considered potentially eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. And the next set of student is a student or a young person who has been found eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. So as we've been providing these services over the last several years, I'm really of the feeling that these PreETS services can really help to do a couple of different things. They can really help to prepare a young person for life after high school, whatever that means for them. It could mean that they're going directly into work. It could mean that they're going off to some kind of secondary program or training program, or or what have you. So whatever their path is going to be, I feel that PreETS can help to prepare them for that. And the other thing that I think that we're finding is that these services can help a student to really connect more or to engage more with vocational rehabilitation services. So there are 5 of these services that are available to students and young people. There's job exploration counseling, work-based learning experience. There's counseling on opportunities for post-secondary, or what is called a comprehensive transition program. So if folks aren't familiar with what that means, the best example I can give right now is the program that's called UNH for You here in New Hampshire through the University of New Hampshire. That is something that's considered a comprehensive transition program. The other 2 services are work readiness training and instruction in regard to self-advocacy. So here on the slide, what I've also tried to do is I've also tried to give a sense of when a student or a young person is participating in any of these services, what are some of the things that they might learn or that they might experience. And so when we're talking about job exploration counseling, pretty self-explanatory. We're helping that student to look at what do they want to do for work, what are they good at, kind of which direction that they want to go. And then when we're looking at work-based learning experiences, we're looking to help that student or young person connect their school activities, so what they're doing in school, with some real life work activity. And so for us here in New Hampshire with our VR program, some of the ways that we're doing that through informational interview, providing some job shadows. We have some very specific programs that we are doing that provide paid work experience as well as internships. Won't be going over that in today's presentation, but that's how we provide some of those paid experiences. And then because of COVID and having to go into a virtual experience, some of what we provide is showing students in a simulated way what some different work experience is. And then we've also, as we've been able to get back out into the community, we're also able to provide some workplace tours. So then when we're talking about work readiness training, students are, I skipped around here, I'll go back to that post-secondary one here in a minute. When we're looking at work readiness, we're really looking at what does the student or young person need to know when they're on the job? What does the employer expect of them? What are the skills and behaviors that they need to know or be familiar with? And then bouncing back here to that post-secondary and comprehensive transition program, we're really looking at helping the student to explore, if I want to go off to a college or training program, is it 2-year, is it 4-year? Do I need to look at maybe some kind of financial aid? What's the difference between high school supports and college supports, disability supports at the college level? And then in relation to the comprehensive transition program, I mentioned a bit ago that we, here in New Hampshire, we have something called UNH for You through the University of New Hampshire. So we would be able to provide information to those students and young people with intellectual or developmental disability that were interested in a program like that. And then to round out the services in regard to self-advocacy, this is really helping a person to look at, how do I speak up for myself? How do I effectively share what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what my interests are, and how do I do that in a variety of different circumstances? And this is something that I think is incredibly important for a young person with a disability, in that oftentimes I think what we find is that students may not have a great sense of what their disability is and how that impacts them, and how they have to speak towards that in different scenarios. So being able to participate in the self-advocacy pre-employment transition service can help towards that as well. So, so we have a couple of different ways that the PreETS services are provided here in New Hampshire. And so I had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that we had 2 sets of students or young people that we provide these services to. We have the potentially eligible and we have the eligible. And first I'm going to share with you what the differences are between the two, and then I'll talk with you about how we actually provide the services. So if we talk about the potentially eligible, that literally is a student or young person who has not yet applied or been found eligible for excuse me, VR services, vocational rehabilitation services. Whereas an eligible student, that is somebody who has applied for and been found eligible. So I just really want to quickly touch upon, what does eligibility mean for VR? Eligibility means that we look at 3 different factors to determine someone's eligibility. Is that person someone that has a documented disability? Does that disability impact them in one way or another, from either obtaining or maintaining employment on their own? And then can it be demonstrated that having VR support or services can help them to either obtain or maintain employment on their own? So, so in this regard, when a student or a young person is eligible, we've taken them through that process of applying for services and then taken them through the process of determining them eligible for services. So now what I'll do is share with you how these services are provided here in New Hampshire. So for a potentially eligible young person or student, we have workshops, a series of workshops that we provide throughout high schools throughout the state. And these are provided by somebody that is referred to as a student transition specialist. And we have 5 of these individuals that are across the state. And they are VR counselor by trade, but their specific charge is to provide PreETS to the potentially eligible students. On the other side, if somebody is eligible for VR services, they too can participate in those group workshops provided by a student transition specialist. The other piece of it, however, is that they're going to have a VR transition counselor assigned to them. And that VR transition counselor is going to be specifically working with them, which I'll talk with you about in a little bit, in regard to VR services and VR services that are going to help them to get a job, become employed, all of those kinds of things. So another way that we provide these services are, as I mentioned before, there might be some young people who have moved on, they're in a post-secondary program, and they're still eligible potentially to receive PreETS because they're under the age of 21. The only distinction here that we need to point out is if they're in a post-secondary or training program receiving PreETS, that program has to result in some kind of credential. So that could be a degree program, it could be some kind of licensing. So things like UNH for You, Project Search, if folks are familiar with those programs, they don't result in a credential. So if a student has moved on and they're participating in one of those programs are not considered PreETS. And then another way that we provide the PreETS programming is through certain programs that we fund. And I had talked about that in the previous slide relative to the work-based learning experiences, that we have certain programs that we fund. So this presentation won't cover that today, but just to kind of give some names of some programs that people might be familiar with. For example, is the Impact program that's throughout the state. We have the Earn and Learn program that is with the Manchester School District. And we also have some summer programming that we do with the My Turn program and Jobs for New Hampshire's graduates. So those are some examples of certain programs that we fund that provide PreETS. For the potentially eligible student, they will need to complete a registration form. That registration form can be ascertained through the student transition specialist. And simply what that registration form does is it gives us some basic information about the student. It is signed off as permission by a parent or guardian. And it is also signed off by either a school person or somebody else within their team or a medical provider that's able to attest to that student or that young person's disability. And then for an eligible student, it's all the same in terms of how PreETS are provided. They can participate in workshops in their school through a student transition specialist. They can work on things directly with their VR transition counselor. And again, if they're in post-secondary, they have an opportunity. They may also have an opportunity to participate in one of the programs that I mentioned. The difference here is that in order to participate in PreETS, because they're already receiving services through vocational rehabilitation, they don't require a registration form. So some of the things here that I think are important to begin to think about in regard to pre-employment transition services is that I'm of the feeling that PreETS services really help to lay the foundation for a young person. And so some of what I say here in terms of what can help, what can be of help to a young person when they're participating. Obviously, they're exploring what they want to do for work or for a career. We're able to provide them with some hands-on experience relative to the working world, or at the very least, being able to connect them with people that are out in the field doing the work. They're able to learn about the different skills that are necessary to meet employer expectation. We're doing research around post-secondary or training that might be available to them. And then lastly, being able to express one's thoughts and abilities and desires effectively in different circumstances. And I think all of these things are incredibly important for a young person and a student to be aware of and to get experience in as they move on through high school and then beyond. So here what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to give some examples of just some of the very broad topics that might be looked at when a student transition specialist or even a VR counselor is working on pre-ETS or program is working on pre-ETS. So when we're looking at job or career exploration, we're doing assessments, we're helping with decision-making and career planning, labor market information, in-demand industries, non-traditional employment, and networking. When we're looking at workplace readiness, we're looking at different kinds of skills and expectations that range from social skill to job searching, workplace skill, safety in the workplace, independent living. When we're looking at post-secondary, again, we're looking at that career planning and that goal setting. Hopefully for some of these kids too, we're looking at some career paths. We're looking at the differences between when I was in high school versus now when I'm in college, because we know that looks very different. How does a student begin to even tackle thinking about paying for some kind of a post-secondary or training program? If they want to go into the military, what does that look like? And then if they even want to do some kind of specific training or apprenticeship. And then relative to self-advocacy, again, we're helping that young person to really look at who am I? What do I know about myself? How do I communicate those things? How do I problem solve? What are the personal habits that I need to maintain? What do I need to know about financial literacy and those kinds of things? And then with workplace learning, I mentioned that a little bit ago about some of the things that we can provide. Some of the other things that we might do is something called virtual job shadow as well. So these can be provided, these workshops, either on site or they can be provided virtually. We've learned how to do that quite well in the last couple of years. The student transition specialists are going out at minimum monthly to the schools that they're in, and sometimes more. And we typically, what we'll do is we'll adapt these workshops to really look to meet the need and skill of both the student, the young person, and the school that we're connecting with. So the next thing that I want to talk about here is really setting the course and that connection between a student or a young person participating in pre-ETS and then kind of moving it over, if you will, into VR services. So again, I'm of the feeling that by doing pre-ETS, participating in pre-ETS, we're preparing that young person to work with a VR counselor who's going to help them to really kind of set up a roadmap toward what do I need to do to achieve the goals that I want relative to becoming successfully employed. Looking at how to better engage that young person in the VR process so that they can develop what's called an individualized plan for employment. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And I think, the point that I would make with this point is I can remember hearing so often from students when I was doing counseling with young people that they would come to me, meet with me for the first time, and they would often say, I don't know who you are, and I don't know why I'm meeting with you. And that was really difficult because that showed me right off the bat that there was even more work that had to be done to try to pull that student in and keep them engaged. Whereas now, I think when a student is participating in these pre-employment services, it's giving them that opportunity ahead of time and sort of opening that door in a much more friendly way. And then also thinking, how do we utilize the information the student has learned? So how do we take that pre-ETS information, and then if they choose to move on to VR, how do we utilize that information to help them to build and then ultimately achieve their employment goal. So then oftentimes people will ask, when does VR get invited to the table? How do we do that? When is the best time? And so really, if a student or a young person is under the age of 18, they're not their own guardian, that really has to be, that invitation has to be initiated, if you will, by that parent or by that guardian, letting their school contact person know that they want the VR counselor for their school invited. And then certainly if that student is their own guardian, they have the ability to extend that invitation themselves. When thinking about when is the best time to invite a VR staff person to an IEP meeting, really the best time is when we're talking about transition planning, as well as, within that talking about employment. I think it's safe to say that we know that there are many different reasons to hold IEP meetings. And it's often not necessary for a VR staff person to attend every single IEP. So it's really important to look at sort of the when and the why and what's being discussed. So if a VR staff person isn't able to attend either in person or online, it is completely okay to ask them to contribute by providing some feedback in writing. That's perfectly fine to ask that. And then at this time, VR transition counselors are really the ones that attend the IEP meetings versus the student transition specialist. The student transition specialist may attend on occasion, but typically they may be attending really only when workshops are being discussed. So right now it's not very common for a student transition specialist to attend an IEP. So the next is really how are services designed, VR services. It's important to note that these services are available to those students who have been found eligible for VR services. And so really our services are designed to help that individual to either identify or to solidify their goal towards employment. We want to help them to discover what's the appropriate path that you need to take toward achieving your goal, or which could include a career path. We need to look at what are the necessary supports, services, or activities that are going to help that person to become successfully employed. And then we need to develop benchmarks or ways that we're going to be able to show progress towards that employment goal. So when all of these things are implemented, this is what VR calls an individualized plan for employment. So for those of you who are familiar with special education, Section 504, this is much like an IEP, an individual program, education program for students, or a Section 504 plan. This is our version of that. So in those instances, that is the document that helps to drive the work that's being done for special education or Section 504. This is the document, the individualized plan for employment, that drives the work that VR is going to be doing for an individual. So it's important to note here that pre-employment transition services are not required to receive VR services. So somebody can apply for VR services at any point in time. They don't need to be participating in PreETS in order to engage in VR. So here are some example VR services that one may receive when they're engaging in VR. I do want to put out kind of a precursor here, or a caveat here. Every single service that is listed here as an example service is something that VR provides. Whether or not we provide it for a particular individual, there isn't a definitive yes to that, and there isn't a definitive no to that either. What it really depends on is we're looking to establish services that are really determined based on the employment goal of the individual and what are the needs of the individual and how does their disability impact them. So one of the key examples that I like to give is I say, even though people can't see it right now on the screen, I am a person with a disability. I'm a wheelchair user. I have cerebral palsy and I'm in my late 40s. That's the basic premise. And if I'm coming in to receive VR services and there is somebody of a similar age, similar kind of background, and have the same disability as I do, and they're coming in to receive VR services as well, 9 times out of 10, we're not going to be receiving the same set of VR services. Why? Because we're different people and our disabilities more than likely impact us very differently. We have different interests. We have different life circumstances. So it really is the responsibility of the VR counselor to work with the individual, to really work through those things, talk through those things, and discern what is best based on that information. So I can fully understand and fully appreciate that it is, very difficult sometimes to wrap our head around, well, why can't you definitively say that you will do this versus, do that? And the answer is because our services need to be very individualized. So some of the other things I'd like to mention in regard to that is when we're looking at services, we also have to look at what other funding sources might be available to somebody before we agree to pay for any service. And the other thing to note is that some of our services may require a cost share on the part of the individual or their family. And we determine that through a test, a financial test or worksheet that people need to work through. And we determine if that's necessary or not. So just to kind of, reiterate here and just kind of go over, we have diagnostic testing that we're able to provide. Certainly, evaluation that helps an individual to look at what they want to do for work. Certainly one of the key services that we provide is actually helping people to get into jobs. So job placement, we might do something around independent living and helping them to gain independence. We may even look at some medical treatment if it's going to help to correct things or to improve things or prevent things relative to disability. Certainly, we provide services to students who are in school, supported employment for those folks who might have more significant disability. If you're deaf or hard of hearing, we might look at interpreter services and transportation. So transportation could range from anything from helping somebody to explore whether or not they're going to be appropriate to get a driver's license. It could be to explore, hey, I live near or on a bus line and I need some assistance to get bus fare, sort of to get my feet on the ground. It could be also to look at, hey, I'm in a good position to be able to drive, but I need a modified vehicle. So looking at vehicle modification. So there's any number of ways that can be looked at. So now I'm going to talk about how do we connect these services to the IEP or the individual education program for a student. So basically, VR and special education, they're governed by 2 different pieces of federal legislation. So the VR program is governed by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, and special education is governed by IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Each piece of legislation, interestingly enough, when you look at it and you look at it relative to transition, both pieces of legislation require that we're coordinating our services. We're coordinating those services between the IEP and the IPE through VR. So it's important to note here that when we're connecting those services, those VR services to the IEP, it's important to note that whatever is being included in the IEP, it must be related to employment. Nothing can be written into an IEP to be provided by VR unless it's been agreed to by the VR counselor. And VR cannot be providing services that should be being provided by the district while the student is still in school. So the example that we give here is the student may be in need of some kind of specialized technology in order to participate in their school day. And that really is the responsibility of the school. So we really cannot be providing services that should be being done by the school during the school day. And then I really feel that this is, in terms of connecting and collaborating on services, it's really an opportunity for the student or young person's team to really talk about that cost sharing of services that are related to employment. That, hey, if you do this, then I'm willing to do this. I think sometimes when we come to the transition table, so to speak, on behalf of a student, it can be difficult, it can be challenging, and people sometimes are really ready for a fight right off the bat. And so that can really impede conversation. But I think that if we're willing right off the bat to just kind of step back for a minute and really think about what that student needs, and then kind of come at it from a standpoint of, from a realistic standpoint, hey, would you be willing to consider this service? And then maybe help to create like a ripple effect of, if you do this, I'll do that. So the next thing here is the Pre-ETS and the IEP connection. And really this is probably more so for an educator, but VR within a transition plan within the IEP is considered a community partner. So when you look at all of the different Pre-ETS services, the 5 services, they really are linked to the transition services that are within an IEP. So if you look at both sides of the slide here, and Pre-ETS, we're talking about exploration, we're talking about employment, we're talking about post-secondary, we're talking about self-advocacy and even independent living within that. And then you'll see over on the transition services side that where these things really do link up. And so we really are moving in this direction where we're saying to schools that the Pre-ETS workshops can really assist schools to develop those measurable post-school goals, and looking at transition services, and then in the end, thereby helping them to meet indicator 13 and be compliant with indicator 13. So we're really excited about that, and to see how we can assist schools in that way. So the next thing that people will ask is, how do I get connected to any of this? And so if you're interested in Pre-ETS services or workshops for your son or daughter, there are a couple of different ways to do that. And so you can contact your local high school case manager or whoever it is that you're connecting with in terms of your child's IEP or 504, and you can inquire with them whether or not workshops are taking place at their school. And if not, let them know that you're interested in seeing about getting workshops connected to their school. You can certainly contact the student transition specialist directly for your region to learn more about what they're doing and where they are and how they can make those workshops available. We do offer on a weekly basis. Folks do need to sign up for it, but we do offer on a weekly basis a parent information session that helps to give more information about these workshops and about VR services. We do this via Zoom. Or another way is to complete a workshop registration form that you can get through your student transition specialist. Now, on the other hand, if you want to look to actually apply for VR services, you can do that on your own, but we also encourage that you contact your local high school case manager and let them know that you want your son or daughter to be participating in VR services, because making that connection with the case manager, letting them know that you're interested in VR, that, in my opinion, helps to make that connection for that invitation for future IEP meetings. And it also, in my opinion, hopefully opens the door to begin to have that conversation around collaboration between the school and VR on behalf of your son or daughter. Like I said, very similarly, the Zoom workshops to learn more about VR also open to a good way to find out more information. And then you can also refer your son or daughter for services by either contacting the local VR office, or now in recent months, we've also implemented an online portal which folks can use to refer themselves. And so as we wrap up here, I've just included some different resources that people can avail themselves of. The first resource here is our website for vocational rehabilitation. The next one here, you'll also find on our website. It's more of a quick link for that. It's a toolkit that we offer to people who are interested in VR services, and it walks you through what is VR, what are the different aspects of the VR process, and what somebody can anticipate. The next link here is to find your local VR office and where they're located and their contact information. The next link here talks about the online portal. And so literally it takes you to the portal and you'll have to sign up, and then you can refer your son or daughter that way. And then the next thing here is just the link to the information for the parent information sessions that one can sign up for. And then in closing, there are a couple of different people that you can contact within our agency, the VR agency, relative to transition. Myself, or you can contact my colleague, Joy Sobolewski. She is our transition administrator, and you'll see our contact there. So thank you very much.